I've got to have a clicker. Oh, there it is there. Thank
Wish
you.
is my command. There you go.
Very good. Very good, very good, very good. Thank you, thank you.
Hello.
Thank you. I think I've come to Shoreditch, and I've just got the worst cup of coffee I think I've ever had for about the last 10 years. I thought that's what Shoreditch was good for, wasn't it? All press, wasn't it supposed to be good for coffee? Whoops. Oh, there you are. That's very good. No, I've donated it to the carpet. Thank you for joining us. As you can see, we're sitting in front of our slide, and it's about the next creative revolution. And I'm here with Orlando Wood. I spent something like 50 years in advertising. Orlando has spent 20 years looking at the effectiveness of advertising, how it works, why it works, and the result of that is a series of talks that he's giving that have been filmed about how we create and generate the next creative revolution. If I assume, that is, you believe creativity is important. I hope this audience does have a view that creativity is important. If you don't, I'd go to another stage. There's a stage there about technology, and you can do that one. But this is about that. But I think our introduction did come up with this line, as you can see here, that last year brands spent upwards of 750 billion on advertising. It is estimated that only 6% of it is truly, truly effective. That's a terrifying thought, isn't it, Orlando?
It's a low number, isn't it,
I always kind of go, if that was Bosch, who make brakes, and said, well, only 6% of our brakes really work, you know, they'd be out of business, wouldn't they? But anyway, go on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose we need to define what we mean by truly effective, because that is the term here that this thing hangs on. And truly effective, you know, I think for you, for me, means work that's transformational for brands, that has the ability to drive profit, to grow market share, to really transform a brand's fortunes. And so that 6% figure, and I think it's worth just dwelling on it. Should we have a look at the next slide?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So that's 6%.
But you got some. We did this.
We
had a bit of criticism.
Yeah, we've had a bit of pushback on this. So I think it's only fair to sort of explain where the thinking and the number comes from. So when you look at this is emotional response to advertising. So 6%. This 6% figure comes from this. So these bars here show the profit ROI that you get with work that doesn't generate much of an emotional response. That's the 1 and 2 stars. This is System1 data working with Walk and their Romy data.
Can you see?
Middling response. And then that sort of transformational leap you get with 4 or 5 star advertising over on the right there. That kind of advertising generates, 3.5 times, 4 times almost the amount of profit that this kind of advertising that generates no emotional response or very little emotional response gets. And that's what we're talking about here. That's the truly effective figure that we're talking about. And that's what it gets.
5.7.
Exactly, emotional connection. Across the top there, separate study, that's an audit of all the ads that System1 has ever tested in the UK and the US, and we test things on a daily basis as they air. So it's an audit, and only 6% are achieving that level. So the question becomes, well, how do we get to that side of the chart? How do we become a 6%? How do we increase the 6% figure?
Yeah,
perhaps.
I think, as it says on that, we're in the industry of churning out mediocrity, and I don't know. When I was working in advertising, I didn't get up in the morning to say I'd like to churn out some more mediocrity. I think I was trying to, as many of my colleagues were, trying to turn out something that was great. I thought what was funny about the criticism of this, and it was a bit like arguing how slowly is the Titanic sinking, because some people sort of push back at this. But the reality is, you don't need data to tell you. Go and talk to people who don't live in the world of advertising and talk to them about the communications industry, and I think you'll hear them saying, I don't like advertising, there's too much of it, I pay to avoid it, and in a way, we've got to be very concerned about this. It's a sort of a place we're in where our industry could become irrelevant.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, very dangerous. But you would make the point here on this one as well,
That's
wouldn't
right.
you?
I mean, this, by the way, that's 4 times roughly the amount of growth, or profit. This is expressed as growth. This is the IPA's data. And it just shows the difference between fame advertising, this sort of showmanship advertising that generates an emotional response, its ability to grow brands, and more rational kind of salesmanship type advertising. And that's very similar figures, actually. So that's where we really want to be, I think. And that's, what really we're talking about today.
Yeah. And you would say here, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Say a golden age of advertising technology has not been a golden age for advertising effectiveness.
No. Well, 3 things have happened, really, haven't they? I mean, you've got people, I suppose, marketeers placing more budget behind short-term performance-type advertising, away from brand. You've got also this sort of shift towards low-attention media channels, which doesn't help to generate mental availability or what's really needed for growth. And you've also got this shift in advertising style that I've described in my books, all happening at the same time, a kind of triple jeopardy that I've talked about at Cannes before. And so when you see that, the effects of that as we'll see on this next slide, is this fall in effectiveness. Slight improvement there, but then we get COVID and it goes down again. That's the black line. Set against this purple line here. And the purple line is short-term objective setting. This is from the IPA's database. So you've got this decline, and it directly mirrors this focus on the short term, on the now, on, performance, really.
Isn't it? I mean, it always I always used to say that I think regardless of how good marketing directors were, I always had this image of them going home every night, going down on their knees and saying, "Dear God, please will you make it a science and make it predictable for me?" And God always answers back and said, "I'm sorry I tried, but I gave them free will, and now you're completely fucked. So, you've got to find another way of appealing to them."
I think you're right. Science,
technology has allowed people the kind of belief that they can measure everything, hasn't it? As brilliant as technology is, of course, we regard it hugely, but we've allowed it to dominate all of our thinking.
Yeah, and the measurement of very short-term responses. So that's part of it.
And it's always going to be that way. In a way, you've got to fight that. So what is this slide?
So then you end up, of course, with advertising that is doesn't start with the consumer in mind, and it tends to start with the product and end with the product and push the product, and then you get this sort of fall in trust in not just in advertising generally, but you get this fall in trust for specific ads, the ads that we're creating and the brands that are creating them. And what you find is that actually trust is becoming more and more important because it's in short supply as time goes by. So this is also IPA data shared with me by Peter Field, and it shows just how important. So brands that are creating advertising that establishes this trust, they're becoming more and more effective. Trust is really important. And there's only one style of advertising, really, that does that, and that's what we're going to come on to talk about.
And then we talk about that.
Yeah.
But it's bizarre. I mean, here we are with an election tomorrow, and the major thing that people are talking about is trust. Who can I trust? And we find ourselves with brands not understanding the foundation and the value of trust, and sort of almost, in a sense, ignoring it. Well, and what's bizarre about that, of course, is that trust was at the foundation of brands in the first place, wasn't it?
That's what they're about.
What they're about.
The mass market, well, I can trust that brand because I know, it does good things. It's funny enough, though, John, you mentioned that, because the AA and Credos have just done another study on, trusted professions, and advertising. Some good news has just been knocked off bottom place by politics and politicians and media. So we're moving in the right direction.
We can feel good.
Yeah.
because we're no longer on the bottom.
No, we're no longer on the bottom, no.
You should feel bad because the only one you're above is politicians. So it's not a good place to be, is it? You know?
Well, actually, this is where we were in the 1950s.
We're estate agents in that.
I think they were a bit higher.
They were a bit higher. Estate agents are higher.
But this is where we were in the 1950s, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, in the 1950s, very similar to today, because scientific advertising, and the chief proponent of this was Rosser Reeves. And Rosser Reeves, of course, invented the unique selling proposition. And so this...
Can I just ask a question there? How many people know who Rosser Reeves is? Not many. That's like in architecture, not knowing who, Mies van der Rohe is. You should know who Rosser Reeves is. You should look it up.
So Rosser Reeves. So let's show some Rosser Reeves' work.
This is it.
This is some of Rosser Reeves' work on the left here. For Colgate, I'm in the way here. What's new in Colgate Dental Cream? It's missing in every other leading toothpaste. And he goes on to talk about Gardol. And this is the sort of unique selling proposition. And in his work...
It's down there too.
Yeah, it's down there too, yes. What you find is this focus on the science sort of starts to end up with advertising looking very disjointed, very broken up, a bit like the sort of performance advertising you see today, short, sharp cuts, words on the screen, no sense of the whole. And through this monotony, this repetition, people really started to distrust advertising. And they also distrusted it because of its reliance on motivation research, which was about, sort of trying to find out what would nudge people through science. And then you get Bill Bernbach, and you get the creative revolution. So this was about 1960. We see this ad appearing on the right here for VW. And this looks totally different. I mean, just look at it for a minute. You've got this sort of a sense of the whole. You just look at the whole thing. You take it all in very quickly, very easily, all at once. And the headline, lemon. And this sort of incongruity here draws you in. So you've got two very different styles. And what Bill Bernbach did, he believed in finding the magic in the product. And he believed in treating the audience with respect and trusting in their intelligence. And many other things that we could talk about. But this was totally transformational and made this brand stand out against all the other car brands that all looked the same at the time.
So, I mean, we're looking at the 1950s, early 60s. So today, who would that be today if I was to...
Well, I think Colgate are still doing advertising that looks a bit like this, actually, if you look at their ads today. Who's doing advertising like this? Well, I think Cadbury's are doing a really lovely job at the moment. Their work is very quiet. It's all about generosity, and it stands out against the noise of everything else that's out there. And also relies on suggestion and ambiguity in the way that the characters play off each other. I think these are some of the principles that I think are really very important, and that's probably the closest thing I can think of at the moment.
So, but also, this is kind of left brain, right brain, isn't it? This is
right. That's right. So, because you
talk us through that.
So in my work, I look at Ian McGilchrist's work about the two modes of attention: broad beam and narrow beam attention. The broad beam attention associated with the right hemisphere, and the left hemisphere associated with its very narrow, goal-orientated attention. And what you have in these two schools of advertising, which, by the way, go further back than the 1950s, they go back 100, 150 years, is you get advertising on the right here, which we might describe as showmanship, is there to capture the broad beam attention of the right hemisphere. The word advertising comes from the word advertere, the Latin advertere, to turn your attention towards. And that's really the essence of advertising. How do we turn people's attention toward? How do we capture that broad beam attention through the living, through movement, through intrigue, through humour, through things that, are illogical on the face of it? And then we have advertising on the left here, which is already speaking to the half-interested. And that, if you go back 100 years, Claude Hopkins, who influenced Rosser Reeves, talks about speaking to the half-interested and only the half-interested. Now, we live in a world where we can target the half-interested with ever-increasing precision. And so we've drifted over to the salesmanship school of advertising and away from showmanship. And it's showmanship. They're both important. Each supports the other. But of the two, showmanship is the more important and the one that drives growth and profit.
And so if you, in a way, it's interesting that, isn't it? Because if you think of many of the great brands today, they're driven by showmen, aren't they? I mean, whatever one thinks of Elon Musk, I mean, you know, a showman. You know, Steve Jobs.
Puts a car into space.
Showman. You know, he said, I don't believe in advertising, and then launches his new Tesla into space. I think that's called advertising, Elon. It's just a kind of different way of doing it. Because now he's desperately keen on advertising. Now he owns X, formerly known as Twitter. But if you look at so many, Richard Branson, you look at James Dyson, you look at, they're showmen.
Yeah.
And so much of today has become analytical, it's become data, it's become, and of course it's a comfortable world to put yourself into because you can measure everything. And just interesting, that observation of how we're obsessed with measurement. You know, the top 10 this, the best 5 that, who's done that. It's an obsession we've got. And if you play to that obsession, you multiply it and you sort of almost emphasize it to the loss of everything else.
That's right. You know, we're so busy weighing the pigs, we're forgetting to feed them. You know, it's the old management consultancy expression, and that's what's happened. And so we end up in a world where we're not provocative, where we're not projecting a personality, where we're not, you know, being, I suppose, honest in an intriguing and open way with the consumer to draw them in. That sort of advertising tends to start with the product and end with the product. Whereas this sort of advertising starts with the human condition, an understanding of the human condition, and gradually we narrow down to the product, and we think, well, of course, it had to be that all along. You know, it's a different way of approach, fundamentally different way of thinking about the receptivity of your audience, and you know how you might intrigue and capture their attention.
But I think also you know, it always struck me that a great brand, you're trying to make it a part of culture, aren't you? You're trying to elevate its importance, like we are with anything, really. If you're Taylor Swift, you're trying to elevate what you're doing beyond somebody else. Or you're on a stage at Glastonbury, you want to be bigger than... And the same, in a sense, with advertising, you're trying to do the same. And you look at these two, and you go, well, which do you think has become a part of culture and therefore elevated the value of the brand and its effectiveness? And I think it seems to be one of the things that our industry has lost. You know, I always used to say, I work in advertising, I don't live in advertising, and you're trying to build the outside world in. And this lives in a world called advertising. This is trying to take it out of advertising.
Yes.
But I think there's... I've always loved this line of... Somebody once said to me, you don't buy things from people you don't like. And it's so unbelievably simple in its proposition that you kind of go, why are we creating a kind of a mode of advertising that's stopping people liking you because they want to switch you off? And I think the sort of the new media strategy is called stalking, isn't it? Where you basically kind of find out where people are and you stalk them. And I'm not sure stalking is a great way of building a long-term relationship.
It's not a great way to do it.
It's not great, is it? Anybody like being stalked?
No.
Do you think that's a good idea? I think there's a law against it if you're doing it in the outside world, but in the world of marketing and advertising, you're allowed to stalk.
Yeah.
I think there ought to be a law against it. I think we should sort of, you know...
Well, with the demise of third-party cookies, perhaps it's going to become more difficult to stalk people.
Exactly. Now, of course, it's getting harder and harder.
So, but that's right. You know, back at thinking about those two schools of advertising, what showmanship does is it creates a preference. It charms through an emotional appeal, lodges the brand in memory. Salesmanship tends, on the whole, to try to demonstrate product superiority. You've got preference and you've got superiority. And by the way, if you can create preference, the superiority also sort of comes with it at the same time. And that's why showmanship drives, you know, growth now but into the future with these lasting effects, and that salesmanship tends to drive these short-term spikes. It's only speaking to the people in the market for the product or the buying window right now. And that's why it costs more, that's why it only works through repetition, that's why Ross Reeves was doing what he was doing.
But the reality is you need both, don't you?
You need both.
We're not here, you're not saying your research and say, forget that sort of salesmanship, just have showmanship. You need both.
And that works harder when you're doing that properly. So salesmanship works harder when you've got showmanship in place.
Is there a kind of budget split that people would say, if you've got a budget, how much should go against showmanship, how much should go against salesmanship?
Peterfield and Lesbinet talk about 60-40 as the basic rule.
60-40 being 60%
showmanship, 40% salesmanship, and that changes a bit according to category or life stage or brand. But that's a good rule of thumb, good starting point.
And the danger is, in the modern world, if you just stay in the world of salesmanship, selling, it could endanger the brand.
It could.
Does anybody here remember Mojave slippers? Anybody remember Mojave? Yeah? Just an interesting little story, actually. We were at the garage, we were investing in companies, and we were asked to look at Mojave slippers. I think in 2017 were valued at 50 million, something like that. And by the end of 2018, they were bankrupt. And we were asked, could we help them and look at them? And I met one of the owners, the designer, lovely, lovely guy, and I said to him, so, I remember seeing what went wrong. And he said, basically, we were just appealing on digital platforms to gain sales, and it became more and more expensive. As you think about it, you kind of get an initial group of people, then you've got to go for another group of people, and doing it via salesmanship became more and more and more expensive, and it basically killed the brand. And he said we never went out and did showmanship, talking about the brand, what it was trying to do, and essentially it killed it.
Yeah.
So now, here we are. You've done 20 years of research in this through System1, developing a model. This is now, you've turned it into a course.
I have,
an 8-part course. And I think we launched this at Cannes.
We did.
Just a week ago on stage. And we're going to show you a little video here. I think this is where we show the video.
Yeah, yes, I think
we show a video
let's
of us. This is us talking, and this is the video. Now, there is and it's called Advertising Principles Explained, to which I said, that makes ape, doesn't it? And so at that moment, I'm chatting to Orlando. You will see it in a moment. We hope you see it anyway. So we're chatting about Advertising Principles Explained, and along comes an ape.
So here he is.
And here he is. Is that a friend of yours?
Yes, on weekends.
On the weekends only. Lovely, lovely. We like that. And
there he is. You handed him a banana, actually.
I did give him a banana, actually. I thought that would be a good idea, really. I mean, it was kind of that. But, so...
He's normally quite partial to bananas.
Yes, he didn't like bananas. No. Big. But you've done that. You've done it because apes are...
Well, they're an endangered species,
They're an endangered species, as is advertising. We are also an endangered species. They're, of course, being endangered by habitat loss, and we're losing sight of our audience's attention.
That's right.
So there is a kind of similarity there between one and the other.
Plus, we like a bit of showmanship, don't we, John?
We like a bit of showmanship. So, in a way that, if I was to sort of, moving on from that, we get to this as advertising a threatened species with your course here, ape or die. Is there something that you would want to say about this? Is there something that would say, this is why you should be doing this, or this is what...
I suppose at the heart of this, and when we first started talking about it, there's a quite an important principle, not only that we adhere to in the course, but that I think is important for marketeers to think about in their own work. And it's a principle that comes from Cicero, and it was adopted by the Baroque painters, the Catholic Church in about 1600, and they described the importance of delight, teach, move. Delight, teach, move. Delectare, docere, movere in Italian. And those three things really ran through Baroque art, and I hope they run through this course as well. Because when we're talking to people, we need to entertain them, as well as tell them something about what we're doing and move them, create a psychological transformation. And so in this course, you learn how to create that psychological transformation in your viewer and your audience. You learn how to do that through the face, the body, the voice. You learn how we look at humour and the importance of humour in creating that psychological transformation and generating things in memory. And that's the importance of character and personality too. So these are some of the things we look at, as well as how to stand out. And so delight, teach, move is my sort of final triptych, if you like.
But I think, and in a way, without being critical of our audience here, I think one of the great, I've noticed, one of the, I think, great tragedies of our industry today is how little people know about what went before.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was lucky. I had 11 years old, I had a history teacher who walked into our class and said, history isn't about the past, it's about the future. And he was trying to get us to understand that you go into the past to understand how to navigate the future. And we seem to live in a world today where, in the communications industry, we don't know about the past. We don't understand it. We don't, you know, Rossa Reeves, don't know who he is, what he decided, how he wrote, how he did things, how he created things. And I always think, you know, again, you know, if you were studying architecture and somebody said to you, Frank Lloyd Wright, and you said, I've got no idea who you were talking about, I think they'd think that was lacking someone, wouldn't you think? I think so. And I think that one of the things that you've done, I've looked at it, is that you've positioned the kind of the industry, where it is, what worked, what didn't work, and actually give people an answer about how to go forward.
Absolutely.
Which I think is crucially important. And in the end, the one thing I learned in all my years in advertising, if you were the really smart one in the room who really understood, it became much easier to sell the work that you were trying to sell. And in that way, it was a wonderful tool for making you more effective and more creative. So I hope you look into it. It's called Ape or Die.
Yes. I think we've even got in the spirit of salesmanship, we even have a QR code here.
We have a QR code. So you're supposed to put your phone up and take a look at that, please. God. So anyway.
Yes. Thanks, John.
I think our time is up, I think.
Yes.
Time to go and get a decent cup of coffee, as opposed to that terrible one I spilled over the carpet down here and nearly fell off the chair on.
Everyone put their hands together for Sir John and Orlando. Thank you.
Well done.